What's up, everyone, and welcome to this video. Now, I know what you're saying. You're thinking, like, what the hell is this? Like, there's no way that the Sphinx is 800,000 years old. And I have to admit, I was rather skeptical, too. Like, I've read through the article a couple times, and I had found their research paper. It might just be a link that they have in the article, I forget. But we can take a look at that as well. And I guess the premise behind the theory is that due to the specific deterioration of the Sphinx itself. They're claiming that these agitations in the rock formation, whatever, cannot be due to wind and sand erosion over time, and that it's indicative of like being submerged in the ocean. And so they deduce that, well, maybe not necessarily ocean, but a form of water. So they deduce that since it's been underwater, the last time that would have been able to occur was around 800,000 years ago, which is insane because I think there are people living in caves 200,000 years ago. So I'll go through this article. I pulled up a few different articles, but they all seem to kind of just source the same specific article. And they actually published their findings in a research journal, and we can take a look at that as well. I'm not too familiar with it, but it was featured on a website that has an edu last name, or not last name, I forget the ending for the website. Something that I should know since I'm going into software development. The domain registrar or something, whatever. But let's go ahead and take a look at that, and we'll see what it says. I mean, I am skeptical that the Sphinx is 800,000 years old because I don't know, that's just really hard to believe. But we can go wherever the evidence takes us, and if they can find some more information to further confirm that hypothesis, I think that would be really cool. And it seems like it's something that they should just go ahead and just try to prove or disprove outright if possible, instead of just denying like, oh well, this can't happen. And I guess that the mainstream archaeologists are stating that since there are no archaeological discoveries that are older than 5,000 years, that the Sphinx can't be older than 5,000 years or something like that. But I think it's probably older than 5,000. And I guess there's a hypothesis that its head is not the original head that was on it. It either got changed because of some ruler or something happened to where it got damaged and they had to rebuild it. I'm not exactly sure. Let's go ahead and take a look at the Sphinx that is 800,000 years old. And you decide if it's true or not. Feel free to leave me a comment. Let me know what you think. All right, so a new geological study shows that the Great Sphinx of Giza is 800,000 years old. I mean, they have a pretty compelling argument for it. One thing I'm just not too sure about yet is like, what are they doing to confirm that the age of the head is 800,000 years old? They go on, they give some reasoning behind it, stating that they have an idea as to why, but I don't think it's foolproof. You'll see what I mean. One of the most mysterious and enigmatic monuments on the planet's surface is undoubtedly the Great Sphinx at the Giza Plateau in Egypt. It is an ancient construction that has baffled researchers ever since its discovery, and until today, no one has been able to accurately date the Sphinx, since there are no written records or mentions in the past about it. Now, two Ukrainian researchers have proposed a new provocative theory where the two scientists propose that the Great Sphinx of Egypt is around 800,000 years old, a revolutionary theory that is backed up by science. The authors of this paper are scientists Manichev, Vyacheslav, Jakoslav, the Institute of Environmental Geochemistry of the National Academy of Sciences of Ukraine, and Alexander G. Parkomenko, Institute of Geography of the National Academy of Sciences of Ukraine. So it seems like they're from two, pretty legitimate organizations. I don't know much about Ukraine, archaeology or institutions of science, but they do have a research paper that was published, and they have a lot of sources for it. So I'm sure some people could dig into that even further than I did. The starting point of these two experts is a paradigm shift initiated by West and Shok, a debate intended to overcome the orthodox view of Egyptology referring to the possible remote origins of the Egyptian civilization and on the other physical evidence of water erosion present at the monuments of the Giza Plateau. According to Manichev and Parkomenko, the problem of dating the great Egyptian Sphinx construction is still valid, despite the long-term history of its research. The geological approach in connection to other scientific natural methods permits answering the question about the relative age of the Sphinx. The conducted visual investigation of the Sphinx allowed the conclusion about the important role of water from large water bodies which partially flooded the monument, with the formation of wave-cut hollows on its vertical walls. The morphology of these formations has an analogy with similar such hollows formed by the sea in the coastal zones. The genetic resemblance of the compared erosion forms in the geological structure and petrographic composition of the sedimentary rock complexes lead to a conclusion that the decisive factor of destruction of the historic monument is the wave energy rather than sand abrasion in the Eolian process. Now that's a lot, that's a pretty convoluted 2 sentences. So I guess they're just stating there that like this is the reasoning behind their idea about it being water erosion as opposed to just wind and sand, which I don't know anything about this stuff, so I guess I'll just take their word for it. But I mean, yeah, that makes sense, I guess. If they're saying that these types of erosions are due to sand and this type is due to water, and they're saying it's water, then sure, let's just go with what they're having to say here. Maybe some other archaeologists and researchers will provide some more context. These lakes were distributed in the territories adjacent to the Nile. The absolute mark of the upper large erosion hollow of the Sphinx corresponds to the level of water surface which took place in the early Pleistocene. The great Egyptian Sphinx had already stood on the Giza plateau by that geological or historical time. A strong argument was made by Ukrainian scientists in regards to the Sphinx, arguments based upon geological studies which support Shok's view regarding the Sphinx and its age. So here we have the western wall of the Sphinx enclosure showing erosion consistently along its length. Courtesy and copyright of Colin Reader. Okay. I mean, I see what they're talking about, but I don't, I'm not an expert on erosion. Manichev and Parkhomenko focus on the deteriorated aspect of the body of the Sphinx, leaving aside the erosive features where the Sphinx is located, which had been studied previously by Shok. Ukrainian scholars focus on the undulating terrain of the Sphinx, which displays the mysterious pattern. Mainstream scientists offer explanations for this sharp feature and state that it is based on the abrasive effect of the wind and sand. The undulations were formed because the harder layers of rock are better at withstanding the erosions, while the softer layers would have been more affected, forming voids. All right, so that's like the mainstream, archaeological take. Makes sense. However, as noted by Manichev and Parkhomenko, this argument does not explain why the front of the Sphinx's head lacks such features. In regards to the argument made by Shok about the heavy rain period which occurred around 13,000 BC, the Ukrainian scientists recognized Shok's hypothesis, partially suggesting that the erosive features of the Sphinx go further back than 13,000 BC. Manichev and Parkhomenko argued that at the... Okay. This sentence structure is like a little off here. Manichev and Parkhomenko argued that the mountainous and coastal areas of the Caucasus and Crimea, which they know well, have a type of wind erosion that differs morphologically from the erosive features noted on the Sphinx. Essentially, they argue that such wind erosion has a very soft effect, regardless of the rock's geological composition. So that's really cool. So they're saying that since, I guess they're familiar with that specific area of the world, that it has a different type of erosion due to the way maybe the climate or the wind and the humidity or whatever occurs in that region of the world. So my suggestion to that would be, is there anything else that further corroborates what they're stating there? So if there's further evidence to support that, that would just kind of go towards their idea about the Sphinx being 800,000 years old, which is insane. I can't even begin to fathom if that was actually true. That just turns everything on its head. In our geological field expeditions in different mountains in littoral zones of the Crimea and Caucasus, we could often observe the forms of Aeolian weathering, which morphology differs considerably from the weathering taking place on the GES. Most natural forms of weathering are of smooth character, independent of the lithological composition of the rocks. To make sure, I'm just making sure I have the microphone on, because that would have really sucked if I'm doing this whole thing and I forgot to turn on the mic. It might happen here and there. All right. Some more scientific text coming up. They continue further and explain. Our personal experience in the scientific investigation of the geology of the sea coast gives reasons to draw an analogy with the GES and to suggest another mechanism of its destruction. Specialist geologists who work in the field of seacoast geomorphology know such forms of relief as wave-cut hollows. Morskaya Geomorphologia, 1980. They can be one and multi-story. They are arranged horizontally to the seawater surface if the coast makes a vertical wall or cliff. Especially deep wave-cut hollows are formed in precipitous cliffs built by the strata of carbonaceous rocks or carbonaceous. I have no idea. Such forms of coast relief are well known and studied in detail on the Black Sea coast of the Caucasus and Crimea. Popov, 1953, Zenkovich, 1960. A general model of formation of the wave-cut hollows in the rocks of the Caucasian Fleisch is given by Popov, 1953. That's the source of it. I don't need to read that. In Dynamics of the Process of Wave-Cut Hollows Formation, one can notice such a characteristic feature that the wave energy is directed to the rock stratum at the level of water surface. Besides, both saline and fresh water can dissolve the rocks. All right. Some more scientific text coming up. They continue further and explain. Our personal experience in the scientific investigation of the geology of the sea coast gives reasons to draw an analogy with the GES and to suggest another mechanism of its destruction. Specialist geologists who work in the field of seacoast geomorphology know such forms of relief as wave-cut hollows. Morskaya Geomorphologia, 1980. They can be one and multi-story. They are arranged horizontally to the seawater surface if the coast makes a vertical wall or cliff. Especially deep wave-cut hollows are formed in precipitous cliffs built by the strata of carbonaceous rocks or carbonaceous. I have no idea. Such forms of coast relief are well known and studied in detail on the Black Sea coast of the Caucasus and Crimea. Popov, 1953, Zenkovich, 1960. A general model of formation of the wave-cut hollows in the rocks of the Caucasian Fleisch is given by Popov, 1953. That's the source of it. I don't need to read that. In Dynamics of the Process of Wave-Cut Hollows Formation, one can notice such a characteristic feature that the wave energy is directed to the rock stratum at the level of water surface. Besides, both saline and fresh water can dissolve the rocks. Okay. Manichev and Parkhomenko propose a new natural mechanism that may explain the undulations and mysterious features of the Sphinx. This mechanism is the impact of waves on the rocks of the coast. Basically, this could produce in a period of thousands of years the formation of one or more layers of ripples, a fact that is clearly visible, for example, on the shores of the Black Sea. This process, which acts horizontally, that is, when the waves hit the rock up to the surface, will produce a rock's wear or dissolution. Okay, so far I think I'm following along pretty well. So they're saying, like, basically this is similar to the Black Sea's erosion. So this is kind of matching up to like another location that they've documented in the past or that they've seen referenced. The fact is that the observation of these cavities in the Great Sphinx made the Ukrainian scientists think that this great monument could have been affected by the above said process in the context of immersion in large bodies of water, not the regular flooding of the Nile. So now it's going into their hypothesis about it being like a vast flood, like covering the entire Sphinx. Manichev and Parkhomenko suggest that the geological composition of the body of the Sphinx is a sequence of layers, composed of limestone with small inner layers of clays. Manichev and Parkhomenko explain that these rocks possess a different degree of resistance to the water effect and say that if the formation of the hollow were due to sand abrasion only, the hollows had to correspond to the strata of a certain lithological composition. They suggest that the Great Sphinx hollows are formed in fact within several strata or occupy some part of the stratum of homogeneous composition. So I guess they're showing the back of the Sphinx to kind of illustrate what they're talking about. I mean, sure, I guess. I mean, all of this is beyond me. Manichev and Parkhomenko firmly believe that the Sphinx had to be submerged for a long time underwater, and to support this hypothesis, they point towards existing literature of geological studies of the Giza Plateau. According to these studies, at the end of the Pliocene geologic period between 5.2 and 1.6 million years ago, seawater entered the Nile Valley and gradually created flooding in the area. This led to the formation of lacustrine deposits, which are at the mark of 180 meters above the present level of the Mediterranean Sea. According to Manikev and Parkhomenko, the sea level during the Cambrian phase is the closest to the present mark, with the highest GES hollow at its level. A high level of seawater also caused the Nile to overflow and creating long-living water bodies. As to time, it corresponds to 800,000 years. And I think in the research paper they say 750,000 years, but we can take a look at that in a second. What we have here is evidence that contradicts the conventional theory of deterioration caused by sand and water, a theory already criticized by West and Schoch, who recall that during many centuries the body of the Sphinx was buried by the sands of the desert, so wind and sand erosion would not have done any damage to the enigmatic Sphinx. However, where Schoch clearly saw the action of streams of water caused by continuous rains, Ukrainian geologists see the effect of erosion caused by the direct contact of the waters of the lakes formed in the Pleistocene on the body of the Sphinx. This means that the Great Sphinx of Egypt is one of the oldest monuments on Earth's surface, pushing back drastically the origin of mankind and civilization. Some might say that the theory proposed by Manikev and Parkhomenko is very extreme because it places the Great Sphinx in an era where there were no humans, according to currently accepted evolutionary patterns. I don't know. I mean, like, do they mean like Homo sapien humans? Like, I think humans are probably around 800,000 years ago. I mean, I guess the convention is like 200,000, but if you told me humans have been around for 1,000,000 years, like, man, yeah, I guess so. That is kind of like striking. Now, I've always imagined like 250, 300,000 years, you know, in terms of our evolution. But I also believe in the sense of evolution that mankind has always been man. We've just changed shape. Like, I don't believe you're ever going to find like a missing link, and I don't believe that we specifically evolved from like chimpanzees or something. But was like the species Homo sapien around 800,000 years ago? Honestly, I don't know. If you told me no, I wouldn't be too surprised. If you told me yes, I would be not too surprised either. Furthermore, as it has been demonstrated, the two megalithic temples located adjacent to the Great Sphinx were built by the same stone, which means that the new dating of the Sphinx drags these monuments with the Sphinx back 800,000 years. In other words, this means that ancient civilizations inhabited our planet much longer than mainstream scientists are willing to accept. All right, so there's like the rundown of that article, which is, I think like a lot of the same articles are being featured or on different sites. But then this is the research paper, and it's in dark mode because I use dark mode, so that's why it's all inverted like this. I'll bring up the pictures in a different browser, and I'll just put them in the intro video for you guys. But where was this information that I saw here? And this is everything that was quoted in the article. Here's like an illustration of what they're talking about. I saw something. I think it was, yeah, right here. So they say, in the recent years, one could observe the growth of interest in dating the construction of the Great Egyptian Sphinx, GES, which is determined to a considerable extent by new ideas about geological factors which could influence its safety. In view of another interpretation of the geological and geographical data, the historical archaeological method for determining the GES age, about 5,000 years old, can prove to be unfounded. The authors of the report have another point of view in considering the problem. We have taken the GES age such as it was indicated by theosophist Yelena Blavatskaya in one of her basic works in 1937. She wrote, "Notice the indestructible witness of evolution of human races, from divine and especially androgynous race, the Egyptian Sphinx, that mystery of centuries. According to Blavatskaya, the time of the GES erection should exceed 750,000 years. Are there some geological indications which are evidence of such an old age of the Sphinx? Consider the brief prehistory of the problem." So that's the number that I saw. So this other woman believed it was 750,000 years. I mean, I'm not too sure, to be honest. And this is where you can, I guess, go and access where the paper is located, and it's academia.edu. So it seems like a reasonable organization. I'm not too sure. It's all in Russian. This is just some other sites kind of talking about the same thing. So there you have it. At this point, I'm not really too sure what I believe. I mean, I would be open to, more evidence to indicate either yay or nay. At this point, I think it probably leans, like the evidence would lean more towards it not being 800,000 years old, because I guess like bold claims require bold evidence, as that saying goes. So who knows, maybe now that they put this out there, more people will try to refute it. And if they try to refute it and they can, that's great. We can just disregard the theory. But if they can't refute it, then that might warrant some additional research and, maybe some more investigation into the possibility that it's really old. And I think humanity is probably a lot older than people give it credit for. Like, especially if, I know I always say this, but I think some people were living in a cave for 200,000 years. So it's like one specific group of people lived in the same cave for that long. So who knows what's been going on for the past million years. Well, I hope you found this interesting. Thanks for checking out this video. You can find me on Twitch if you're into checking out live streams of games, and I'm also on a lot of the other sites as well. So thanks a lot, and until next time, take care.